Greetings and salutations. Today I want to have a look at a hen photo with y'all. I went and visited Grandma this past weekend, and her neighbor has several chickens, a couple roosters, a couple turkeys, some rabbits, and a couple dogs. And this neighbor was kind enough to let me hang out with her birds while they free roamed in the yard at large. And this is the hen I want to edit with y'all. Now, she's an older hen, and I was attracted to her because of the design, the patterns in her plumage. It's there's a little bit of white in there, there's a little bit of orange, a little bit of yellow in there, and every feather has this nice little lacing to it, that black pinstripe. And that's just kind of what attracted me to her. I don't know much about birds, about chickens, but she could probably be a showbird. Now, I've already done an initial edit of this photo, and this is what I came out with. And what I want to do is try and walk y'all through my process and see if, without looking at all the settings and how it's set up now, to see if we can get back to that. So as I said in the last video, the number one place I like to start out with is the lens correction and the transform panels. I like to do lens correction first, remove chromatic aberration, enable profile corrections. I like to do that first because when you enable the profile correction, it can change the exposure, the toning of the photo. So if you go and do your toning first and then you enable lens correction, you might very well just be undoing or altering a lot of work you've already done on the photo. Now, the transform section I like to go to typically next, because if the horizon's a degree or two off, or if I need to fix the angle of a light pole or something, or fix some distortion, that can affect how you're going to crop the image. Next, we'll go to the basic section, and I'm going to apply the Modern 3 profile. I'm going to hit auto white balance, and that normally gets us pretty close, but what I want to do now is I'm going to go down, I'm going to cool the image down, and then I'm going to warm it up to see what I like better. And for this one, I think I like it a little warmer. Next, we'll go to the toning section, and I'm going to hit auto tone. And that usually gets us pretty close, especially for a standard image. Taken during the daylight, there's not a whole lot of complexity to it. Auto toning can get you really close. It could even be good enough for whatever your purposes are. But we're going to take it a little further. So I want to increase global contrast by a bit. And we're going to play with the highlights to see where we want them. I'm going to try not to sniffle too much throughout this. Ragweed's been wreaking havoc on me. And I think I liked the highlights taken down just a wee bit more. And we're going to do the same thing with the shadows. We're going to bring them up a little and down a little to see what we want. And I think I liked the shadows brought down just a bit. And we'll do the same thing for the whites. In fact, I think I liked the whites just a little bit up. And again, we'll repeat this process with the blacks. As you get more familiar with photography and your photo software and how you want your images to look, you'll get a better idea of whether or not you want to bring those up and down. And as you work more on an image, you'll get a better idea of whether or not you want to bring the shadows, bring out more detail in the shadows, or if you want to bring the shadows down to obscure some details, to create a little bit of mystery. It's really about practice, repetition, and experimentation. I'm going to go ahead and reset the vibrance and saturation settings We're going to tackle the subject of color in the HSL and the calibration sections. They're a much better way to handle color than the vibrance and saturation sections. Add a little bit of texture and a little bit of clarity, and we'll move on from the basic panel. I'm going to come down to the detail panel. I'm going to add a bit of sharpening and a bit of noise reduction. ISO 1600 is about where I start adding noise reduction, not normally a lot, and you certainly don't need to. Most cameras can handle ISO 1600 really well, which is what this photo was shot at. It can even, most cameras, modern cameras, 2015 later, some older ones too, can handle ISOs up to 2500, 3200 really well with little to no noise reduction. That's it for the detail panel. And before we start working on the colors, I want to go ahead and crop it. And if I'd had a little more patience when I was shooting these photos, instead of trying to follow the birds around and focus on trying to capture their best side, if I'd have just gotten a chair out and sat down and let them peck around and get used to me, I probably could have focused on the photographic process a little more and, just rotated the camera. Since I didn't do that and I want this to be a side portrait, what I'm going to do is crop a lot of this out. I want a 4:5 aspect ratio, which will be 5:4 in a second. And the only way I know to change that to a portrait orientation is to take the corner and drag it over until it pops up like that. I'm sure there's an easier way in Lightroom. I just don't know what it is right now. Now for composition here, I think I want the rule of thirds, the left guideline on her eye. Normally people would want those two intersecting points to be on the eye. In this context, I want just the left line to be lined up with her eye. And you can see that it lines up pretty nicely with her breast, and we have these very lovely leading lines with all the feathers that they kind of lead away and then lead to her head. So I think that is a good crop right there. Hey, hey. Next, I want to go to the HSL section. That's hue, saturation, and luminance. And it may not be the best way to do it or even recommended, but I like to start the luminance and work my way backwards to saturation and then hue. The luminance is how bright or dark a color is. You can think of it like exposure for a color. The saturation is just kind of like how blue is blue. And the hue is like what shade of blue. Is it, I don't know. I don't know my color names very well. Is it cerulean? Is it royal? That's kind of what hue is. Is it burnt sienna or is it fire engine red? So in the luminance panel, I'm just gonna go through each color individually and see which direction I want to take it by going kind of to a mild extreme. So start with -30, and then we'll go up to 30. And I think this is a context where I want to bring the luminance down just a little bit on the red section. It's mostly affecting her face, the comb, her waddle. Next we'll go to the orange, and it's going to affect mostly her face, but also parts of her body. So we'll go mildly extreme, then we'll go down a little. We'll go all the way to the extreme, and you can see just how easily you can muddle an image and its colors. And not even going that far, if we just go to -50, we can see some really unnatural looking dark oranges in there, and that just shouldn't be there. So we won't go that far. I'm thinking probably about -10 also. And similarly, we'll go all the way down with the yellows, and that just kind of, it removes a lot of detail in her feathers, and it makes the image look unreal. So we'll bring that back up. We'll go all the way to 100. And here we're starting to see where it just looks overexposed, because again, we're affecting the luminance, essentially the exposure value. So as you can see with those two examples, just those two color channels going to the extremes in either direction, you see it go from... So as you can see with the extreme on those two color channels, we go from muddied and ruined colors to essentially an overexposure. And you really don't need to go far with any of these sliders. We're talking values of plus or minus 10 or 15. They're all very small changes, but they all add up over the course of every slider and every section of this panel. I think I'll bring this value down just a bit. I think I want to bring down the greens just a little bit. It's mostly, it's chiefly affecting the background. And the background for this image just isn't all that important. We don't want it to look too unrealistic. But if I can tone it down just a bit, that would help give us more separation between the background and our subject. Now, because I've been through this image several times already, I know the aquas don't do anything on this image, and the blues and the purples, and to some extent the magentas, mostly affect her beak, and I just kind of want to leave that alone for now. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the saturation panels, and I'm going to probably boost the reds a little bit. Coming up to the orange panel, I'll probably boost those a little bit too. $30 might be a bit much, but I think 20 is a good value. And the same thing for the yellows. I think I'll go a little further with the yellows because they're a little more subtle throughout her body. Now the greens, I'm actually going to take down a little bit because again, this is just going to help give us a little more distinct separation between the background and our subject. Aquas again won't do anything. See, that's 100. It's -100. And the blues and purples, again, are mostly going to affect her beak. And it's kind of a highlight on her beak. So I think I'll bring those down a little, and that'll just kind of accentuate that highlight on her beak. Now we're going to move over to the hue section. And we certainly don't want to affect the reds of her head that much. Let's try +20 and -20. I'm thinking -10 is probably a good value there. And the oranges, we're probably going to move those closer to a darker orange. And the yellows, will probably push those down just a little bit also. The greens will go a little further with those. It feels a little more representative of the time of year this image was taken. It was taken in September, end of summer, beginning of fall. Her yard was still pretty green, but since it is, you can, using the HSL and the calibration sections, you can affect the feel, the sense of a season, of the time of year a photo was taken. And so by just bringing it down a little, we can get a little closer to that fall feel. I think -30 is a good value there. And again, the aqua is not going to affect anything here. I'm going to leave the blues and purples alone because, again, that's mostly affecting our beak, and there's just not much I want to change there. And from there, we're going to move on to the calibration section. We're just going to iterate through some values to see what we like. And we'll go mildly extreme again with -30 on the tint of the shadows and +30. We'll go to the extreme with +100 and -100. I think I like a little bit of a negative value here. Go mildly extreme with the red primary, and same thing in the other direction. And we're just going to kind of repeat this process for each of the sliders. I think I want to leave the green primary hue where it's at, but I do want to desaturate it just a wee bit. And we're going to, again, go to some extremes, mild extremes, on the blue primary. I think I like a slight negative value there. And I think I want a slight desaturation there also. Alright, now with that done, I want to add a post-crop vignette. And the typical way I would do this would be I would go to the effects section. This is editing this photo in Lightroom Classic. I've found out about a 3-year-old bug in Lightroom Classic in which a vignette will not apply in the preview window, at least. I don't know if it'll apply on export, but the preview window at least, if you have the Modern 3 profile applied. There is a workaround, a couple workarounds. You can either apply the vignette beforehand, before you apply the profile, or you can go up to the profile section and just toggle profiles. And you can go back to Modern 3 immediately after you've established some setting on the post-crop vignette, and that's a workaround. But for this vignette, I don't want to use the built-in tool. I want to use a radial filter. So you can come up here to the radial filter, it's the little circle filter, or you can press Shift-M. And we're going to zoom out a bit because you're going to have to make this quite big. And I'm going to rotate it to kind of fit her body. And we're still going to make it quite big. Because again, this is with a vignette, you really, there isn't much you want to affect except for the corners. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to increase the feather a little bit. And I'm going to make it a little bigger. I'm going to use this vignette to decrease the exposure a bit. And decrease the shadows a bit. Now this is what it is with the vignette, the radial filter vignette on and off, on, off, on, off, on. Now with it on, I'm going to come in here to the brush. I'm going to zoom in a bit. Press O to show the filter, the areas it's affecting. And what I want to do is just erase some of the parts around her head. So I'm going to select the erase button and make sure auto mask is tick. Auto mask is just going to help us keep our erasures to the subject. Now, because we have very good background subject separation, Lightroom's having a very easy go at this. If it wasn't for that, I'd have to get in here and very carefully brush it out. Let's bring this up to fit. Yeah, I think that's good there. Let's open up reference view and have a look at the previous edit. So it's close to the original, but there's a little more detail into this image and a lot more color in it. And there's nothing wrong with either of these edits. The desaturated one has a lot of nice qualities to it, and the one that has a little higher saturation has some nice qualities to it. But I think in this most recent edit, I do want to go back into those reds in the HSL section and just probably actually bring them down. I think that looks good. I think that looks good. I'm satisfied with both these photos, and I'd happily share them anywhere on. I think either of those photos look good. The saturated version has some interesting bits. The slightly desaturated one has some interesting bits, and I'd happily share those across any social medias. Anyways, that's it for today. I hope you all enjoyed this video, or at least were mildly educated or mildly entertained. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week.